Thank you so much for having me here today. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm thrilled to see so many of you here, eager to join in meaningful dialogue, meaningful conversation about this system.
And that is that you can go back 50 years when it was blatant. To hell with now. Just go back half a century in your mind to when it was obvious. 1963, the high watermark of the civil rights movement, right? 1963 is the year of the March on Washington. It's the year that Medgar Evers is shot down dead in his driveway in Jackson. It's the year that those 4 little girls were blown up at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, right? It's the high watermark of the movement. It's a year before the Civil Rights Act is even passed. It's 2 years before the Voting Rights Act. It's 5 years before the Fair Housing Act. It's a period in American history when we were still a formal system of white supremacy. I know we don't use that phrase because we don't believe in honest language, but now that's the only terminology that really fits. We were an apartheid country, period. A system of racial fascism, period. And if we can't bring ourselves to use that term because it sounds un-American, then we're not grown up enough to have this damn conversation. If to say that we were a system of formal white supremacy for the vast majority of our country's history somehow makes us unpatriotic, then you're not an adult enough to enter into this conversation, or I would dare say even be in college, right? This is an adult conversation for adult people who are not afraid of truth, you see, but we run from truth. So nobody uses that term. We say things like, well, America has had her problems. What the hell does that mean?
People in this country feel, but I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, that the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby has anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
I think that America needs an honest discourse with itself. It's like the greatest country in the world by default. You know what I mean? But we could actually be the greatest country that ever existed if we were just honest about who we are and what we are and where we want to go, and if we learn how to have that discourse.
Because, don't worry about that. See, I don't have to worry about that. All of a sudden, you ain't going to pray for me. Now, brown-eyed people are the ones who originated or who founded every major religion on this earth. No white people have ever founded a major religion. Now you need to realize the contributions that have been made to society, to civilization, by brown-eyed people, by people of color. I'm talking about people of color here, folks. And most of us are not aware of those things because we live in a racist society and because we are educated by a racist school system that only teaches us about white contributions. And that's a fact. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. If we would start telling the truth in schools, we would not have racism. We could cure racism in this country. Somebody said, I heard somebody... I heard somebody in the green room say that racism is inbred. No, it is not. Racism is not part of the human condition. Racism is a learned response. You have to be taught to be a racist. You are not born racist. You are born into a racist society. And like anything else, if you can learn it, you can unlearn it. But people...
Things like racism are institutionalized. It's systemic. You might not know any bigots. You feel like, well, I don't hate black people, so I'm not a racist. But you benefit from racism just by the merit of the color of your skin. There's opportunities that you have. You're privileged in ways that you may not even realize because you haven't been deprived in certain ways. We need to talk about these things in order for them to change. I do the show. I walk down the street. Black people like it. White people, the generations, it doesn't matter because it needs to be talked about. It's like the elephant in the living room that nobody says anything about.
50 years have passed since Dr. King delivered his soaring "I have a dream" speech. I have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go.
And so, in reflecting on where we stand today, 150 years after the Emancipation Proclamation and 50 years after the March on Washington, I'm going to take Martin Luther King Jr.'s advice and tell it straight. As Dr. King put it quite bluntly, just months before his death, after the civil rights victories had already been won, after the civil rights bills had already been passed, he said, quote, "I do not see how we will ever solve the turbulent problem of race confronting our nation until there is an honest confrontation with it and a willing search for the truth and a willingness to admit the truth when we discover it."
You know, I wanted to be black, to be honest. That's all I ever wanted. Especially since one day growing up, I met an American, and he was shocked that in South Africa we had all these titles. And he said to me, he said, "Well, you know, Trevor, if you go out to America, they'll label you as black." And I said, "Really?" He was like, "Oh, hell yeah." "Yeah, buddy, everybody's black out there, yeah. You'd be super black." Oh, well, that sounds good to me. Super black. Yeah. And I made a choice. Like, first chance I get, I go out to America, I'm going to get a piece of that black. And I did. Boarded a flight. It was an 18-hour journey, Johannesburg to New York. I didn't sleep a wink. I just sat there in my chair like a madman, watching every single black American movie I could find. Just sitting there going crazy, practicing like, yeah, you know what I mean, yeah. King Kong ain't got shit on me, yeah. I'm sorry? Oh, the chicken, please, the chicken, thank you. No, that's fine, thank you. Yeah, put it in your mouth, yeah. 18 hours of flying, 18 hours of practice. I landed in New York and I was fluent in my black American. For shizzle my nizzle. Everything. I had the walk, I had the talk. I was so black, I was even laughing. I was like, ha ha ha! Ha ha! Yeah! Ha ha! Oh, my man! Oh, this you? Ha ha! That for me is the coolest thing in the world. Black Americans are so cool and confident. They'll make you feel good about yourself just by asking if you are you. It's magic. They just walk up to me like, hey yo, this you? This you? No, for real, man, this you? And you'll be like, yeah, I think it is, yeah. And I was that black. I was super black. I was loving it. Until this guy walked up to me. I don't know it. Didn't even know me. Tapped me on the shoulder in the airport. He's like, ¿Qué? Paisano, ¿qué pasó, güey? Que Lalo quiero de que sino que Lalo eros, ¿no? Ya llegamos, papi. Ya llegamos. I said, what? You talking to me? He said, yeah, I'm talking to you, man. I'm just saying, we made it, baby. We made it, eh? And now that we're here, our kind, we gotta stick together, hombre. Our kind. 18 hours of flying and I wasn't black. I was Mexican.
I have a neighbor of mine who was a farmer, and I have some sheep, and I have a lot of black sheep. And sometimes when you have the black sheep turn white. I don't know how the hell they do that, but anyway, so my neighbor who's a farmer said to me not too long ago, he says, you know, I don't understand. All your black sheep stayed black. And I said, yeah, I guess because they knew they were in a black family. And he said, and my farmer neighbor, who happens to be a white man, said to me, oh, you're not black. You're just a neighbor. I go, I most certainly am black. But that was his way of saying, you're not like what I think other black people are. Right. So I understood that's what he was saying, but that's what you're saying.
Is your color important to you?
Yes.
Absolutely. White folks listen to that. Color is important to people of color.
Now, I think to be fair, we have to acknowledge that poor and working class whites really had their world rocked by the civil rights movement. You know, wealthy whites could send their kids to private schools, give their kids all of the advantages that wealth has to offer. But poor and working class whites, many of whom were themselves struggling for survival, many of whom in the South were themselves illiterate, they faced a social demotion. It was their kids that might get bused across town to go to a school that they believed was inferior. It was their kids and themselves who were suddenly forced to compete on equal terms for limited jobs with this whole new group of people they've been taught their whole lives to believe were inferior to them. And then, to make matters worse from their perspective, affirmative action programs created the perception that black folks were now leapfrogging over them, on their way to Stanford, Yale, Harvard, University of Chicago, and off to corporate America. And this state of affairs created an enormous amount of fear, anger, resentment, anxiety, but it also created an enormous political opportunity. Pollsters and political strategists found that thinly veiled promises to get tough on them, a group not so subtly defined by race, could be enormously successful in persuading poor and working class whites to defect from the Democratic New Deal coalition and join the Republican Party in droves. It was part of the effort to flip the South from blue to red with coded racial rhetoric on getting tough on crime and welfare.
That issue as a statistician or a political science, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing. And a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
In the words of H.R. Haldeman, President Richard Nixon's former chief of staff, he described the strategy this way, quote, "The whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to." Well, they did. And a couple years after the drug war was announced, crack began to ravage inner city communities. And the Reagan administration seized on this development, actually hiring staff whose job it was to publicize inner city crack babies, crack dealers, the so-called crack whores, and crack-related violence. Many people in here may be too young to remember that there was a time when our television sets were saturated with news about crack babies and crack dealers and images of black men in handcuffs and orange jumpsuits in courtrooms as communities were swept and raided. The demon drug crack hit the news. And as drug crime and blackness became conflated in the media, a wave of punitiveness swept over the United States. Legislators started passing harsh mandatory minimum sentences for minor drug crime, sentences harsher than murderers receive in many other Western democracies. And soon, Democrats began competing with Republicans to prove they could be even tougher on them than their Republican counterparts. And so it was President Bill Clinton who escalated the drug war far beyond what his Republican predecessors even dreamed possible. And it was the Clinton administration that championed the laws banning drug offenders from federal financial aid for schooling upon release, banning drug offenders and people with criminal records from public housing. It was the Clinton administration that championed the federal law denying food stamps to people with drug felonies. To a large extent, so many of the rules, laws, policies, and practices that constitute the basic architecture of this new caste system were championed by a Democratic administration desperate to win back those so-called white swing voters, folks who had defected from the Democratic Party in the wake of the civil rights movement. But of course, there were more than a few black politicians and black voices that were saying, get tough too. The crack epidemic in particular had created violence that was spinning out of control, and fear was sweeping many communities about what this drug was doing. And one thing that has become abundantly clear to poor communities of color is that if you ask for good schools, you aren't likely to get them. If you ask for jobs or economic investment, you won't get that either. But what we've learned is that the one thing poor folks of color can ask for and get are police in prisons.
That the United States government was secretly sponsoring the smuggling of cocaine into the country. Federal officials have long denied such speculation, pointing out the billions of dollars spent intercepting drugs. Newly released documents and testimony from Justice Department and DEA officials now show the stories of government running cocaine are in fact true. An investigation conducted in Mexico found the American government allowed that country's largest drug cartel, Sinaloa, to operate without fear of persecution.
So I can understand why you might not realize the degree of ongoing racial inequity today. If you don't know that people of color, particularly blacks and Latinos, are 5 to 9 times more likely to be incarcerated on a simple drug possession offense than white folks, even though white folks use illegal narcotics at exactly the same rate as people of color. Exactly the same rate. In fact, among young people, white folks are more likely to use illegal narcotics than black folks and Latinos. Among people between the ages of 12 and 25, the rates of drug use for white folks are higher. I know this not because I read a study, though I've read them all. I know it from personal experience, and I can tell you this because the statute of limitations has damn well expired.
In my opinion, it takes education. The whites have to be re-educated so that the racism that they have in their heart can be eliminated, and our people have to be re-educated so that we will know how to do something for ourselves instead of waiting for others to do it for us all the time. Well, how will that re-education be brought about? Well, just as in World War II, this country could use its news media to propagandize and make the whole American public love the Germans and the Japanese, rather love the Russians and the Chinese and hate the Germans and the Japanese. And then after the war, they changed it and made the American public love the Germans and love the Japanese, hate the Russians and hate the Chinese, which shows that they can make the American public love whom they will and hate whom they will. And that same process can be used to re-educate the American public and show white people how to love black people and show black people how to do something to stand on our own feet and solve our own problems.